So, dear friends, today we have three amazing guests. Brigham McCown from the Hudson Institute. We have Konstantin Eggert, Deutsche Welle journalist and expert. And we have Emmanuel Dupuy, who is the president of the Institut Prospective en Europe. If I said your title well, but you will be able to correct me if you want, for obvious reasons.
Okay. Institut Prospective et Sécurité en Europe.
Yes, Sécurité, that's what I forgot. Exactly. So, actually, you have a few seconds to present yourself in a better way, because it seems I missed it. So please, Brigham, let's start with you.
Hi, well, Denys, first of all, thanks for having me on here, and I really appreciate the invite. So I run the energy security portfolio here at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. I've served in 3 presidential administrations, 2 transition committees. I'm retired military as well, and a professor at a large public university here in the U.S. And I concentrate really on risk management and geopolitics, as well as energy and transportation.
Thank you. Konstantin?
I'm Konstantin Eggert. I was born and raised in Moscow, in spite of the name. And I am an exile for 10 years now from Russia. I've mostly worked as a journalist. As opposed to Brigham, my military career is only 3 years of national service as an officer. But what I'm specializing in is at Deutsche Welle is actually mostly analyzing Russian politics. But since my background, education, is in the Middle East, I'm a historian of the Middle East and translator of Arabic, I still maintain a close interest and quite a bit of contacts in the region. And recently, ever since I would say the Russian invasion of Syria, Russian participation in war in Syria, I was more and more focused, not only on Russian politics as such, but on how what Russia does in the Middle East. And full disclosure, or rather, spoiler, it doesn't do much that's different from what the Soviet Union was doing, and the idea is pretty much the same. So I'll try today to speak both about the Russian attitudes, Putin's attitudes to the Middle East, and about the way they play out in the general context of Putin's war.
Thank you, Konstantin. And Emmanuel?
Well, hello, my name is Emmanuel Dupuy. I run an independent think tank in Paris called Institut Prospective et Sécurité en Europe, which can be translated in Institute for Prospective or Foresight and Security in Europe. I've had various positions formerly as member of 2 cabinets working for the Minister of Defense, Strategic Thinking. I'm a professor in geopolitics in various universities in France, public and private, as well as in Europe, in Switzerland, precisely, as well in China. And I'm focusing on the strategic depth of France, mostly the Mediterranean area, Sub-Saharan Africa, a bit less Middle East, but the outskirts of Europe from Eurasia into Pacific, and of course, obviously, the Gulf countries. And I am both on academical level, operational experiences. I was a former French advisor in the French advisor for the military forces in Afghanistan, but I'm also a policy advisor, having a responsibility in a political party when it comes to defense, security, and foreign policy.
Thank you, dear colleagues. So I propose us to start with one of the most pressing issues. And we know that there are a lot of conflicts right now in the world, ranging from the Russo-Ukraine war to the Middle East, where Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023. And I actually would like you to talk about the Hamas-Israel conflict, and in general terms, and also from your national perspectives. And we have the United States, Russia, and France. We may start, for example, with Brigham.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think from a 30,000-foot view level, U.S. and Israel have been allies for a very long time. What's interesting is that you have a conservative government in Israel and then a democratic, more liberal-leaning administration in the U.S. It's clear that they don't see eye to eye on policy or tactics going on at the moment. But What's fascinating is support for Israel in the United States has been pretty solid, not only now, after the Hamas atrocities, but, even with the counteroffensive from Israel. And I think that is largely historical, but it really splits along political lines as well. And interestingly, Christians and Protestants in the U.S., Republicans, support Israel to some degree 10-20% higher as far as a favorability rating than do Democrats. Although with what has happened since November, U.S. Jews in particular are very pro-Israel. And I think we get back to this doctrine of massive retaliation, right? And I spent time with the IDF in the 1990s. And it's difficult for some of us to understand how small of a country it is and how it is surrounded on all sides. And clearly, this is not their first go at it. And so, but what we have seen diverge here in these last couple of months is a Biden administration that wants Israel to not pursue a Rafah offensive and seek a peace off-ramp. And I think this is especially important because for the Biden administration, they've worked very hard, dating back to the Obama years, to put together a regional security plan, which includes Iranian-backed forces. And from their perspective, what could be even worse than where we sit today is a full-on engagement between Israel and Hezbollah up to the north. And so with the election looming, and the Muslim population in the United States is only 1%, but that's still 3.5 million people, predominantly in 3 states that Joe Biden needs to win: New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. So politics is definitely coming into play. And I'll pause there for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigham. Konstantin?
Well, the Israel-Hamas war is something that initially, I think, Putin and his advisors probably saw as a possibility, a chance to exploit, to gain more sympathy, more solidarity from the global South. That's why they had the Hamas delegation very soon after the attack, and that's why all the noises that the Kremlin was emitting were not that different from what we saw on U.S. campuses later. And this is, it's important to understand that courting the global South is actually a strategic line in Putin's foreign policy today, or whatever passes for it. Because basically, it's clear that he's lost the West. And, well, he's working with the West, especially with, the leftists and part of the rightists, but they are not going to be, as we've seen, they're not going to be still major decision makers. They can impact situations in certain countries, but it still is a line of development. But basically, hugging the global South, that's the thing. And for that, Hamas attack was very, very useful. So Putin could prance around saying, I'm the biggest pole of the Palestinians, like on the level of, Brezhnev and Andropov and people. But I think that this cost him something else. This cost him the benevolence of a significant part of the Israeli political class, which was following Netanyahu in his neither left nor right, neither Ukraine nor Russia, this sort of we need our own interests to be defended attitude. Judging by, well, at least looking at the, I don't read Hebrew, but looking at the Israeli media in Russian, which is by the way, quite an important indicator, I see a major shift away from kind of Putin understanding. And I think that Putin's alliance with Iran, which was on display recently in very blatant way, also contributed to a significant loss of Russian influence in Israel, which I do not think can be recouped. I think sort of these very close contacts with the Ayatollahs worked or contributed even more probably to this disillusionment than the Hamas this benign attitude towards Hamas attack. Now, this is an important element for Putin to continue to work with the global South. But I think what we see recently in the Middle East is that his behavior is gradually undermining, not fast, but gradually undermining of whatever goodwill or at least tendency to listen to him that existed in countries like, let's say, Saudi Arabia. I think that Putin increasingly looks like someone who, I wouldn't say who is an Iranian pawn, definitely not like that, but someone who's so much in bed with the Iranians that maybe he should be kept at distance. And what I also think important, that's the last thing I'm going to say, is that this means, and it looks like it, that Putin's calculations to be even to increase contacts with Saudi Arabia and get some kind of indirect impact on OPEC and everything that concerns war. This worked for some time, but I think now this is much more problematic for him than it used to be a year ago.
Thank you. Very insightful. And dear Emmanuel, what is our French view on the Hamas-Israeli conflict?
Well, also I cannot speak about the French position, but I can try to explain what is now the current state of mind when it comes to dealing with the situation in the Middle East, and more likely from 9 months, during 9 months since the 7th of October. I will give you my position and give you maybe how things may be changing the 30th of June and most likely the 2nd of July, as there will be another majority, another Minister of Foreign Affairs, and maybe a shift in the foreign policy. So basically and broadly, French position has always been on the support of this two-state solution since the resolution 242. We've always sustained that since the beginning, nevertheless having been one of the first to recognize Israel after its independence in 1947. But nevertheless, our position is very clear. Since the Venice Commission in 1980, since the recognition of the PLO as a political organization in 1974, and a clear sustain to the legitimacy of having Palestine both in United Nations bodies, this has not changed. So we do make a link between the 7th of October attack and the need not only to focus on Gaza, but to focus on the whole Palestinian issue, calling for the recognition or the reopening of discussion after the 2002-2006 Arab initiative that we've clearly sustained at that period. Now, taking in consideration this element, we do consider Hamas as a terrorist organization. We do consider Hezbollah as a threat, but not a terrorist organization, as we have a special agenda on Lebanon. I will maybe focus more on that. But to be clear, we are sustaining under the article, the chapter of the article, the UN Charter and the Article 51, the right of Israel to defend itself. We've always said that, but of course, the difficulty is how we sustain or how we push and how we give a green light to those in power. Benjamin Netanyahu comes from the Likud. He is not totally in accordance with some of its political partners here in France, whether they are now in power or maybe those who will come to power the 7th of July. We've always said that to tackle the question of fighting the question of terrorism in the area and taking account Hamas, there should be a after-day solution, the day after solution. What comes next? What will be the perspective? Are we going back to the situation in 2005 where Israel occupied the territory? Do we need to have a de-Arabization of the political process and a re-PLOization of the political agenda in Gaza, linking with the West Bank? Or do we need to have something else? Maybe more engagement from the Arab countries? I think there has been significant talks about this during the last Arab League summit. More implication when it comes to reconstruction. This has also been assessed by a certain number of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and of course abiding the fact that when it comes to this issue, there are a lot of proxies, there are a lot of states, and we cannot limit it to a Hamas Gaza agenda. We have to take in consideration the global agenda, and there comes where this, of course, impacts the way France sees the question, because it impacts on our precise priorities when it comes to our politics, in our geopolitics in the Levant, namely Lebanon, where we do have, and we still think we have a responsibility since 1920, since 1943, with the end of the proconsulate. But again, I can come closer with the dedication that French president made in August 2020 after the explosion, the 4th of August explosion on the port of Lebanon, where we were dedicated to find a political solution to the replacement of the succession of Michel Aoun on one side, to try to push aside the financial, monetary, social crisis of Lebanon, and of course, finding a solution to a country where Hezbollah has a lot of power, too much power, but again, has power, and we have to take that in consideration. Besides Lebanon, there is also Syria and Iraq. I'm saying this because we still have troops, and this is something we share with the United States and with others, a certain number of countries, and this gives us a responsibility to protect our troops. And this was very well the case when Iran fueled the counterattack in beginning of May, after the beginning of May, after the attack of Israel on the 1st of April attack consulate in Damascus. And there is also Egypt, where we also have a security strategic agreement, and we believe that we must push and help Egypt on one side, Qatar on the other. I'm saying this because these are two of our closest partners in a facilitation mediation process. This is something that France has been pushing for the last weeks, or at least the last month. Now, this is the situation as it is. And of course, there has to be taken in consideration two other elements. First of all, France does not act alone. It acts under the umbrella of the European Union. The external policy, the common security foreign policy of the European Union, is not under the auspices of the French diplomacy, but under the auspices of the External Action Service. And we have to take in consideration that the push, the pressure, and the dedication of Joseph Borrell will very likely diminish as his successor doesn't have the same perspective, does not come from the same political sphere, and does not come from the same territorial specificity. If Kaja Skala is to replace Joseph Borrell, I'm quite sure that the pressure that the External Action Service has been pushing on the Israeli administration will grow less and will be less efficient. The second point is the fact that you have to take in consideration the political agenda of Europe, where a certain number of countries, more over 37% of the population of the countries, are now working under the authority of conservative EPP, and sometimes EPP plus ECR, European Conservative and Reformist, shifting from a sort of centrist. I do not like the word, but our French president always speaks about a central bloc centriste, a centrist bloc, taking consideration that you have extreme right and extreme left. But there is a reality that today the 27 European countries are led 37% by conservatives plus, or conservatives plus rightists. This will have an impact, obviously, on the priority of the external action of the European Union, most likely with the elections coming in Austria in August, and of course the dissolvement of the French National Assembly, which will give more momentum to a more robust fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist posture if Joseph Bardella may be nominated as prime minister.
And we will talk.
As always.
And we will talk.
One last phrase. He has already said that he will definitely not recognize Palestine and definitely sustain Israel. Nevertheless, even if Netanyahu is not prime minister.
Thank you, Emmanuel. But we will talk about our national snap elections agenda just a bit later. I'd like to give the word to Brigham and with a question, because, in all those conflicts, actually, even starting from the Russian annexation of Crimea, the invasion of the Donbass in 2014, different states, and namely Russia, for instance, they use the proxy for false flag operations, or they carry out operations with troops that don't have any patches, no possibility to officially trace them to a country. And we've seen this as well, a bit on a different level, but we've seen also this in the Hamas-Israeli conflict, where, for instance, Iran plays its role and has its proxies, and not only, by the way, the Hamas-Israeli war, but also in the Red Sea crisis. We've seen the Houthis in Yemen that created quite problems for the commercial maritime navigation and impacted, by the way, Egypt. So I'd like you, Brigham, to answer the question about what is the role of proxies, of terrorist organizations, and we all also remember 9/11 in the United States, in the conflicts, or actually in the advancing the agenda by certain rogue state, so the use of the proxies. And we can talk about Hamas, we can talk about Hezbollah, we can talk about, for instance, Afghanistan, the Taliban, but at the same time, you also have, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood, that were quite famous, we can say this way, in Egypt, and they are still supported in Turkey. So how can the Western countries prevent the rogue states, or at least diminish it's the second part of the question, to diminish the usage of those terrorist organizations and proxies?
Denys, that's a great question. And I think if we even go back further during the Cold War, even though we lived in a bipolar world, both the Soviet Union and Americans used their proxies to try to advance their positions around the world. So, and this has been going on even far below that. So the idea of invoking others on your behalf is in a lower level conflict where you can control to some extent the escalation and the rules of the game has been something that, we've all done for a very long time. I think one of the critical junctions that we face in the West is this notion that the world believes in the post-World War II liberal world order as determined by the West. And I would suggest that China, Russia, Iran, and other proxies do not agree with this very premise. So the whole point of trying to negotiate, discuss, bring everybody into a view of liberalism and altruism and foreign policy is naive at best. If anything, these countries want to undermine the Western world order. They don't want to join us. Stability is actually counterproductive to their goals. Destabilization is what they seek. And, we can go back to Georgia even, which frankly was a huge mistake by the West to basically ignore South Ossetia and what was going on there. And I think, Russia understands the chess game, yet the West plays checkers, if at all. And I think we need to get serious about looking at these actions and understanding that, we can't get people on our side because, we all agree in the rule of law. We all agree that you shouldn't invade. No, they don't. And why we repeat this mistake over and over again, I do not understand. China, Russia, Iran, proxies understand hard power. They understand a firm no. They understand that the risk and the result must not outweigh the gain and the benefit. That is what they understand. And why we cannot ourselves get to that point, I don't know. This fear of escalation that currently grips the administration in the U.S. is not only illogical, it's nonsensical. Now, this is me speaking as a Republican, so put that in, into context. I'm not suggesting a far-right isolationist approach to the world either. We figured out 100 years ago that's simply not possible. But I think we have to understand that diplomacy only works when there's a reason, when there's a value for it working. And whether it is with Israel, and by the way, I have to respectfully disagree. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. They have killed Americans. They killed somebody from my university. Colonel William Higgins was killed on a UN peacekeeping mission. They have no legitimacy that I can see because they don't wish to abide by the rules. They are not a stable partner. Neither is Hamas, neither are the Houthis, neither is Iran. And if anything, our approachment to Iran, both here in the United States and Europe, has been a disaster of a policy, has gotten us nowhere. In fact, it's made the world more unstable. Now, I'm not suggesting people rush into war. America is tired of war. We've learned that these follies into Iraq and Afghanistan have been hugely counterproductive to our standing and, frankly, to the American population's concerns of these never-ending wars. But where real threats exist, we must come together, and we must do so in the face of this aggression because, frankly, as we found out with Putin and Ukraine, talking gets us nowhere. So, that's certainly at least my perspective. And until and unless an adversary realizes that the risk and the detriment to action outweigh the gains, that's what's going to be their guiding principle. And that's what we must come together as a West to prevent further aggression.
And a quick follow-up question to you before going to Konstantin. But as you have just mentioned, actually, that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, but at the same time, as Emmanuel said, that Hezbollah is not considered a terrorist organization. Hamas is not considered. Hezbollah is not considered the terrorist organization.
France, in your opinion, does not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization.
Yes, exactly. And so where actually, whereas different countries, they have certain countries, not all countries, they have list of forbidden and terrorist organizations, and including one of the organizations or a lot of terrorist organizations into those lists, as we see, doesn't lead us nowhere. And putting a terrorist organization into a list, it doesn't help to fight it, or does it? And this is a question to you and actually to everybody. Later, I will ask you again about it. And is there any way maybe to create some kind of a synchronize the list? Because it also depends on the policies. One country decides that this organization is not terrorist, and another country decides that this is a terrorist organization. How can we address this from the American perspective, Brigham, please?
Yeah, well, of course, there's a saying in America that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. So there is it depends on one's perspective, but really, I think, again, we've seen unprecedented cooperation with sanctions on Russia, oil and gas after the invasion of Ukraine. Now, they've learned to get around that, right? China, India are benefiting, frankly, from these sanctions. And so we don't have uniformity. But what I think all of us can agree on, and this is clearly something that the Middle East gets, and I think the Gulf states get, is that war is bad for business. And everyone would like to see an end to these things, but by the same token, you can't plead with somebody to stop their aggressive behavior. You do have to talk to them. I'm not suggesting that we don't engage with even those of terrorist organizations or those that are at least seen by some as being, but you have to figure out what the pinch points are. This is raw, hard power, and I think it is supplemented with soft power and with diplomacy. And I'm not even suggesting hard power requires a military response. It does not most often, but it requires people understanding what drives our adversaries and figuring out how to not only get their attention, but get them to stop that behavior. And I think we've been terrible at it for several decades.
Mm-hmm. So actually, the same question to you, Konstantin.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there were three short questions. So one question is that the use of proxies and terrorist organizations by the rogue states, what can we do about it? And the third question was actually about the list of terrorist organizations per states and the possibility to create a uniformity about those terrorist organizations. And even if it's possible, and can it give a result? Can it actually help us to diminish the impact of those terrorist organizations?
Well, I think I would agree with Brigham. It's political symbolism of doing that is important, but the issue is basically practical politics or practical measures that you take. Because most of these players, some of them will take pride in being designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, or by any other country, Western country at least. I think that, Putin has no compunction dealing with Hamas, and no matter how many times Senator Rubio says that this is a terrorist organization, we can't be bothered. What I think is important here is to basically understand that, it was only in the case of Iran, I'm not revealing anything spectacular. Hezbollah is an extension of the Iranian state and is part of whatever remains of the Lebanese state. So dealing with it as if it's some kind of Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, holed up in Warsaw Metropole Hotel planning an attack in Israel is no use, because we're dealing with a completely different type of resources, completely different type of organization, completely different type of planning, and in the end, completely different type of self-awareness. From the point of view of Hezbollah, it is Lebanon. So I think that maybe in some way, these things are not relevant. They may be symbolically relevant, but then you have to, in practical terms, you have to apply a completely different method in dealing with these people. And I think if the Israelis understood that, for example, eliminating yet another sheikh, basically doesn't lead you anywhere. It's like, flowers. You eliminate one and another grows. So I think that's an important thing. And I think in this respect, Iran was extremely good at basically creating it or developing his own proxies, shared proxies, and actually, interestingly enough, flipping. Lots of people in Hamas who would have thought of Shiites like
20 years ago, some kind of heretics, and making them allies. Essentially, the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood today is partly owned by the Iranian state is a huge success of Tehran, and just means that it's a formidable ally. One more thing. Regarding Russia, I mean, you live in Lithuania for 10 years, so I'd rather represent Lithuanian national interests here. I would like to say that personally, I do not think that Russia has a very good understanding of how to work. Oh, they maintain contacts and so on and so forth, but tradition and, if you wish, something that is ephemeral, but still there's kind of Russian genetics of dealing, let's say, with the Palestinians. He's actually talking to people like Mahmoud Abbas, with whom sit down sort of a bottle of vodka, talk about views and reminisce about things. And it's different. It's essentially the secular nationalism with a leftist slant that they understand. Dealing with the religious fanatics, oh, they can, but it's not their cup of tea. And that's why, frankly, I think that Putin realized that pushing, for example, the Hamas connection, it doesn't work that well. And frankly, for the radical Islamists, if we're talking about them in these circumstances, Russia has never become this wonderful beat the American Satan ally, because still you have North Caucasus. You've seen what happened yesterday in Dagestan. For a significant number of these people, Russia is still the same Russia that killed the Chechens, that killed the Bosniaks, that helped Assad put down the Brotherhood in Syria. And so they're all kafirs, and they're all sort of not worth the trust. So we can work with them tactically, but definitely I think that Russia has limits in presenting itself as the pole of the Islamists. It's not your Cyril Ramaphosa, it's not your Lula Shmula, all these kind of guys from the global south. It's different. And so I think that in this respect, Putin has limits here, and that's good. Because I think that in terms of, well, practicalities, Russians can be played against. For example, it's clear that Saudi Arabia has been appalled by the Russian-Iranian very visible demonstrative rapprochement recently, and it cooled down quite a few heads in Riyadh. I think that by basically highlighting Russian impotence and the limited resources that Russia has in terms of manipulating these people, dealing with them, pushing them, giving them. We're not seriously discussing, for example, Russia asking Hezbollah to do anything, attacking Ukrainian embassy in Syria, in Cyprus. No, I mean, you can only go through the Iranians. So basically, I think this should be shown. And why? Because, as Brigham writes, when Putin tries to play up certain things, he's doing it and he thinks, okay, this is kind of this PR operation. But I think that in the Middle East, of all regions, raw power counts for everything. And revealing that Putin is just prancing around, the sheikhs or Ismail Haniyeh or whatever, and in fact has little impact, little influence on them. He can give them even money, but so what? They'll take it. They take orders from other people. That's important, because that will undermine the image of Putin as this kind of omnipotent, how they say in French, Manitou, who is always on top of his game. He's not on top of his game, and I think that is a small element, but let's say in Saudi Arabia and in Oman, where people say, oh yeah, by the way, he's just some kind of guy who doesn't understand much. And so I think that in this respect, we should not overestimate Putin's ability to influence this kind of non-state players, non-state actors. And the rest, I mean, I think Brigham or Emmanuel deal much better with the Russia is not doing any sanctions lists against these.
I guess. Yeah. Russia's meeting Taliban.
Just to reveal one thing, to tell you one thing. Also have to understand, no matter how much Putin would like to do certain rough stuff for the West with the help of non-state actors, he is distracted by other things. As we speak, I see on Russian Telegram channels more and more videos of a major military electronics research institute burning like hell near Moscow. And I know where it is. It's not that far from my former dacha, which was sold many years ago. So Putin is dealing with what is, I can't say it in the presence of US general, but still, I mean, it looks like it's a full-scale sabotage operations launched by Ukrainians or Ukrainian sympathetic elements inside Russia. I mean, when you have such things happening, you don't have much time, in spite of all this kind of huge apparatus that Putin has, to deal and sit and think, what do we do with Hezbollah, by the way? How do we play Hania against the members of the party? I mean, they have much more pressing issues to deal with. And I think this also should be used by the West. The West should be bold in dealing with these people. They're not omnipotent at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful. Emmanuel, France has been targeted, and we all remember the Bataclan terrorist attack, and right now we will be having the Olympic Games, and the terrorist threat is still quite important. And we all remember the French fight in the Sahel region against AQMI and other terrorists in Mali, for instance. But it seems that we have lost this fight. Have we, Emmanuel?
Well, first, I'm not sure we've lost the fight, but I'm sure it's an ongoing fight, and it's very difficult to make peace with terrorist organizations. There's no such thing as acceptance of the end of the fight. We can see that with the Taliban. We can see that with ISIS today. The relativity of victory is something that we have to cope with and that we have to live with. There's no such thing as zero risk in any of our democracies, and we have to be fully aware that we have to keep cooperating more and more. And of course, this is an important milestone of what we stand for together, because we are defending people, because they have been aggressed and killed. You mentioned that. More than 350 French have been killed since the attacks in 2015, more or less during the last 10 years. And we still are we still are preventing terrorist attacks. Not less than 2 days ago, there was a plot against a French synagogue by the way, homegrown citizens, more and more younger, more and more, let's say, intoxicated by cyber warfare, by cyber jihad, which is a threat to all of our nations. Nevertheless, regardless of the position we are defending. So again, let me be more precise about what is a terrorist and what is not a terrorist. Are the proxies terrorist organization? Of course, we do agree that they are not our friends. We do agree that we have to fight against them, and we've been all fighting against them. In Afghanistan since 2001, and for France from 2001 to 2014, 2021 for our American friends. We haven't done that in Iraq during the first war, but we still are committed to prevent ISIS from coming back and being a strong, regressive actor, both in northeast of Syria and northwest of Iraq. We do, of course, are at the same will to prevent the blockade of the free trade and the trade capacity throughout the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and throughout the Hormuz Strait. We've been fighting against the Houthi, both on naval capacity and on ballistic capacity. That is, of course, something very, very sure and that we must keep in mind. Now, I'm not sure designating one organization as a terrorist, one organization as a non-terrorist would solve the problem. IRCG may be a terrorist organization. It is still an organization which is abiding under the umbrella of Iran. So we have to deal with Iran, not of the organization that it is using. And this is true with Hezbollah. This is why we do not want to consider Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. We want to be sure that there is a sort of vacuum of legitimacy in Lebanon so as foreign actors get out of the political system in Lebanon. This was true during the 1970s and 1980s for Syria. This is true today with Iran, and we're abiding by that with a lot of difficulties. When it comes to the fight against terrorism, I think there's no good or bad solution. There are solutions, plural solutions. You know, President Macron said we should maybe have a anti-Hamas coalition on the same basis as we have created an anti-ISIS coalition, the 82 countries who are fighting the international coalition against ISIS, which have shown that if we are dedicated and fighting at different level, financial, cyber, synetical, hybrid, we do have results. I think we should do the same thing with Hamas. Hamas is not only a terrorist organization, it is also a political organization. I should add, it is also a financial organization. If we get rid of the military of Hamas, by the way, now the top military leaders in Israel say it's not possible. So we have to take into consideration what we haven't done yet to fight against the legitimacy of Hamas in Qatar, to fight against the financial capacity that Hamas still has in Turkey, for example. And this, again, allows me to say that we do not only need to fight against terrorist organizations in a symmetric way, we have to fight it in a symmetric way, the way they are fighting and the way they are pushing pressure on our society. This is true with Hamas, this is true with Hezbollah, this was true with Houthi, it has been true with the Taliban, for example. That's my first assumption. My second assumption is saying that the situation needs a very innovative way of seeing the solution for a reason we haven't tackled yet. The concurrency of legitimacy in the area. We are focusing, abiding by the fact that after the 1978 Camp David Agreement, after the 1992 Wadi Agreement of Jordan, after the Abraham Accord, only us can put an end to the crisis or the instability in Levant, which is not true. I've just passed the last 10 days in China, where China has also a solution. It may not be in our perspective, or it might not be positive for us, but there is a global peace initiative, which, by the way, allowed heir to the throne of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, to meet former President Ibrahim Raisi, which we thought was not possible. They made it possible. And they are doing the same thing and thinking that if our Western biased position, or the deux poids, deux mesures solution, we are saying black to Volodymyr Zelensky and white to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is not acceptable. We have to be conscious that our solutions, or the way we are dedicated to fight against hubris Putin, or Putin hubris on one side, must be as efficient as we have to fight an end to the war in Gaza. Because if we do not do that, we will be losing the legitimacy of our action. We'll be losing the capacity to convince our partners that we are a solution for peace, and not only the ones who are fueling the conflict, both in Ukraine and both in the Gaza Strip or in the wider Levant. And now, third point, and I would maybe just allow me 1 minute because my computer is going to run out of battery, and I do not want to be interrupted what I was going to say about the fact that France is dedicated for the security of Europe, of course, dedicated for its security, mostly because there is a bigger threat when it comes to Olympic Games, abiding by its security. And I think this is very important because we have a tendency to believe that our solutions, again, are the only ones that can be put in perspective. I do feel, and I will finish by that we're missing one point when it comes to finding a solution in the Middle East. The Middle East solution. It's not only a solution coming from Washington, it's not a solution coming from the potential European unity or maybe a NATO position, or on the other side, as I just said, countering models from Russia or from China, but there is a local regional solution. We have to give a chance that the countries who have recognized Israel, and this is a very important milestone from October, November 2020 with the Abraham Accord agreement under the authority of President Donald Trump, may be something we have to push. And to be honest, we never thought it would work. I think we should give it a try. And if we have this perspective, then maybe the stunning cooperation between Egypt, Jordan, Israel, France, Great Britain, and United States against Iran will give the impression that we are living in a new Middle East, and that we have the perspective to build this new Middle East, not only having Israel being part of the Occident on one side, and the Arab countries being, let's say, eager to be part of the globe, because they are part of the global South, to be automatically, unconsciously friends of Turkey, friends of Iran, friends of China, and friends of Russia. There are differences inside global South, as big as there are differences inside global North. There are liberal democracies in global South, Morocco. There are illiberal democracies in Occident, in the North, global North, Hungary. We have to stop saying that there is a good global North and a bad global south, which is, let's say, escaping from our authority.
So things are much more complicated than we tend to see them. Thank you, Emmanuel. Going back to the national agenda, and I'd like to go to Brigham. In less than 6 months, you have the presidential elections, and the results may be very interesting. And I'd like you to, for sure, you don't have a crystal ball and you cannot predict future, but if Trump wins the elections, how possibly the United States approach towards Middle East, towards Europe, Russo-Ukrainian war may change or may evolve? Do you have any ideas about it?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, or I would be retired in Provence, perhaps, or somewhere drinking wine and enjoying life if I knew the answer. But we're in uncharted territory, really, here with regard to this presidential election. It's not routine. It's not similar. It's very divisive. Quite frankly, most Americans wish they had a choice C, but there is no choice C. There is a choice A or a choice B. And those are the two candidates we have. For your scenario, should Trump win, I think you can look back to his first term for some
hints,
some guidance in that regard, with respect to Israel, a strong supporter of Israel, moved the embassy right to Jerusalem. I think where it gets a little fuzzier is the traditional Republican and Democratic parties have drifted away from their traditional center spots. And in the Republican Party, you have this new wave of isolationism, populism that we've seen elsewhere. And, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to see where we stand on Ukraine. The vast majority of Americans are pro-Ukraine, believe in defending Ukraine, believe it is extremely important to see Russia not prevail. With some of the right wing of the Republican Party, you see those who believe a rapprochement to Russia is possible, that perhaps there's some other things that need to be done. All of that being said, regardless of who is president, the Congress is likely to be split, with each party maintaining one chamber. They may flip with the Republicans over to the Senate, but you still see a vast majority supporting this traditional notion of America standing with friends of democracy, with opposing authoritarian regimes. What I do think you will see is a much stronger response toward Iran, a reversion to maximum pressure on Iran. Republicans feel it was on the verge of winning, and then we suddenly stopped. Whether this is true or not, time will tell. More pressure on China, on North Korea. But I think Trump is also ultimately a business person. He too wants to make deals. He wants to win, but he wants to make deals, right? And so what we would have to caution against are some of his perhaps worse instincts of his knee-jerk reaction. But I think if we follow him, we've all learned that the first thing out of his mouth is not what you take most seriously. He sort of thinks aloud, and we look to where the dust would settle. But I'm not going to tell you it's going to be smooth sailing. It's going to be a little rocky. And with regard to NATO, I don't think the worst that some in Europe are prognosticating would ever come to fruition. The United States is not leaving NATO. Does the United States, do a lot of people in the United States think Europe needs to do more for its defense and has been languishing in this effort for a decade or longer? Absolutely. But I think the state of the transatlantic alliance will survive a Trump presidency and may even become stronger ultimately. But I'm not going to tell you it's going to be all roses, because I don't think it is.
Obviously. And Brigham, maybe a follow-up question, not about the possible outcome of the elections and its impact on the US stance on the regarding the conflicts in the world, but your country's current position was criticized, and I'm talking about right now about Russo-Ukrainian war, and then I'll go to Konstantin to talk about it. With regard of withholding, when the United States was withholding the delivery of weapons, there were a lot of debates and no decision. And some say that it gave Vladimir Putin some kind of reassurance that he can prevail in this war, and that the Ukrainians may eventually lose, if we may use this kind of a wording, because losing and winning, it's not a defined category of words. So, what is in your opinion? What was the major cause of this arms supply delays, and what was the real impact on the ground? Let's put it this way.
Well, I think both administrations from both parties have made tactical and strategic mistakes with Ukraine, dating back to the Obama years, where they refused to give any lethal weapon aid to Ukraine. Yes. Keep in mind that under President Trump, he started delivering defensive weapons, javelins, other anti-tank lethal weapons, lethal aid for the first time. But, there was this notion, I think, with the current administration, this absolute fear of escalation. And quite frankly, sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. And sometimes
that's what Russians doing.
Right. And the best way to end a war is to be strong, not weak in your response. And so, we're learning these lessons, albeit late. We were late in delivering heavy armor. We were late in fulfilling anti-air defenses. We were late. And the United States is not the only one. I think Western Europe was also cautious in this regard. But, the more advanced weaponry, we're still behind in delivering. If we want the war to end, the very best thing we can do is equip Ukraine with everything they need to end the war on terms that are satisfactory to Ukraine, and that restores the territorial integrity, the integrity of the territory of Ukraine, and dissuades Russia from believing it can win a long-term war by outlasting Ukraine. That is the best thing we can do, number one, I think. And we are still we're still slow to deliver weapons. We've only recently allowed U.S. weapons to be used outside of traditional Ukrainian territory. But that's this administration. There is this fear against escalating, and it's frankly bewildering to me and to others. I think they're learning, but that late learning has cost us time and lives, and I think it's an unforced error that shouldn't have happened.
Thank you, Brigham. And right now, just going to Konstantin and the question about the Russo-Ukrainian war. And in my opinion, for Russia, it is the main conflict. This is some kind of an existential conflict for Putin and for the Russian establishment, because if they manage to subjugate Ukraine either by force or by, let's put it this way, political means, this would mean somehow the recreation of how may Putin see it, an empire or a second Soviet Union, whatever you call it. So, Konstantin, what is the importance of the Russo-Ukrainian war for Putin? Second thing, how are things going right now? Because this war has passed somehow below the radars, because other conflicts have also erupted, and then we see a proliferation of crises in the world. So please go ahead, Konstantin.
Well, but first I want to say McCown for, well, at least vice president, maybe secretary of state.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Thank you.
What I want to say is that and actually taking over from Brigham where he started, I think it is extremely important to understand that this administration, I think, is committing, my personal view, the biggest mistake, which is we're not discussing whether it supplies weapons or whether it supplies them quickly. These are all derivatives of a main mistake that this administration is making. And by the way, the Obama administration was making, but at least the Obama administration was making it before the full-scale invasion. They are treating Putin as if he's Brezhnev. And this is the biggest mistake of all. The fact that you have nuclear weapons doesn't make you a responsible politician who represents national interests of his or her country. The Politburo, I hate communists, no doubt about that. But the Politburo and whoever kind of fronted for it represented the national interests of the Soviet Union as they were understood at the time. And that's why the debate about disarmament and nuclear weapons, that was an important thing, because that was really an important element of a bilateral relationship of two, okay, not equal, but quasi-equal superpowers. The nature of the regime in Russia today is completely different from what it used to be in the Soviet Union. I think we discussed it in Tallinn once with you, Denny. The current regime, as opposed to the Politburo, not only does not have a proper political legitimacy in the sense that it is now a regime that self-sustains by force, but also, and the main difference is that the Politburo ruled the Soviet Union, and the current regime not only rules Russia, it also owns it. So essentially what you have corporation Russia, where every single decision that Putin or Patrushev, or well, Patrushev is out now, but whatever, whoever, Belousov, all the lackeys are taking, it's a decision about not only Russia, it's a decision about their personal wealth, their personal assets, their families, and finally their survival. And this is a completely different psychology. In this respect, I think, I don't want to say that Biden is responsible for this war, no way. But the mistake that this administration has committed was actually to respond to Putin's provocative massing of troops on the border of Ukraine in 2021 by inviting him to Geneva to talk about nuclear weapons. He saw it as a reward. He saw it as basically as a proof of cowardice. And he saw it as opening for him the gates to deal with Ukraine in his own way, because we have to also understand one thing. This is not the war that is being fought. Like, even the biggest mistake that the Soviets committed was Afghanistan. But still, there was some calculation. I mean, the minutes for the Politburo about Afghanistan are published. It was a one-year discussion, which was about the national interest. In the end, they made the wrong decision. But still, this is the war of essentially one person. Without Putin thinking that he is this new Russian monarch, this war would not have happened, because the corrupt Russian elite around him, most of them, okay, there are some sympathizers, but generally, probably would not have thought about doing that. This is a personal project of a person who thinks that he is destined to be another Peter the Great. And I suppose that this colors it in a very different way. You have to deal with this situation which you cannot discuss it logically with someone like that. You cannot advance arguments that are usually advanced at diplomatic tables, even between the most cynical of vis-a-vis. And this is a big challenge. It's, in this respect, makes absolutely impossible to deal with it for the West with any other way but by the way Brigham described. Only raw power can make these people more sober and figure out that, that's not the way to deal with it. And I suppose that's an important element here, is that what we see recently, the invasion is stalling. We are essentially facing this kind of modern replay of the trench warfare of the Marne and the Western Front in the Great War. Definitely what we see Putin has enough cannon fodder to throw at the front, but it seems that, and we know that morale on the Ukrainian side is not what it used to be. We know that I see them, millions of Ukrainian men hiding from conscription in Vilnius or in Brno or in wherever. We know that there are, but Western weaponry, and essentially the fact that still Ukrainians know what they fight for, and they know they have bigger moral motivation, still provides for a more or less solid defense in which Putin cannot advance. It can be flipped against him now with massive supplies of Western weaponry, with essentially concerted attacks on the not only symbolic but important and not easily defendable targets like the Crimea, by the way. And of course, to my mind, doing more in terms of splitting the Russian ruling class, because the regime is millions of civil servants that are helping Putin to run Russia. And by applying pressure without, and that's the last but very important thing that I want to say, applying pressure without all these ridiculous theories that we are going to have chaos and civil war in Russia. All these comparisons to, the days of Dr. Zhivago are ridiculous, because if you look at Russia 100 plus years ago, it's so vastly different demographically. And it's open data. It's all, everyone, everyone can assess it. The Russian Empire in 1917 was a country of young, uneducated men. Average age, I think it was 32 or something. It was a ridiculously young country, illiterate, with one big unresolved question of ownership of land. Today, it is, in big cities, very well-off middle-class country with an average age of probably close to 50. Huge preponderance of women over men, vast alcoholism, AIDS, stuff like that. Basically, in the big cities, middle-class life that will not be that different from, Lyon. Well, the weather is worse in many places, but still. So no big unresolved national questions. A pathetic population. 2/3 of Russians, according to even the unreliable Russian opinion polls, don't care about war. They don't want to know about it. That's, by the way, what Putin is using. So what people are afraid of. Okay, Brigham is a general. Emmanuel was a civil servant. Of course, we have to take into account this what if. But on the other hand, Putin is sane enough to understand that if he presses the button, all hell will break loose, and he's going to win, he's going to lose this war. There's no doubt about that. NATO is a nuclear alliance which is much more powerful than Russia. So I think that one shouldn't pay much attention to this nuclear saber rattling. I think that it's posturing, and I think that this war can be won by a combined effort of Ukraine and the West. It will be costly, much more costly than it would have been 2 years ago. But it still can be done, because there is also the morale of the ruling class, which sees that it goes nowhere. And we are sitting here on the first anniversary of the Prigozhin uprising, which told us everything we needed to know about the state of the Russian ruling class, which was completely apathetic and passive and didn't rush to help. People will take selfies with Prigozhin. Prigozhin was too popular for his boots, but we'll see. I think that, by the way, trying to forcefully impart on the Russian ruling class that you are wrong, but you can save yourself, talking to individual people, finding them, that's something that should be in addition to massive economic pressure and military aid to Ukraine. Sorry for talking too much, but you hit a very raw nerve.
Thank you, Konstantin. And Emmanuel, France was one of the key, and is still one of the key countries that support Ukraine in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Even in the end of February, our President Emmanuel Macron said that we should not rule out sending the troops to Ukraine should the necessity arise. And right now there are some talks about sending the personnel to train the Ukrainians on the Ukrainian soil. But we have the snap elections. And in 7 days, and in 6 days, on 30th of June, we will be having the first round of the legislative elections. And the polls say that most likely the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella will win the most of seats without the majority, but still will become the victorious of those elections. So, in your opinion, how and actually the important question, and I've even just noted it here, not to forget. During the campaign, the SNAP campaign, short campaign, Blitzkrieg campaign, Jordan Bardella, the leader of the Rassemblement National, said that if his political party wins the elections in France, he will designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. He said it. I've just today seen the video talking about this. So, Emmanuel, how will the French foreign policy regarding Russo-Ukrainian war, regarding Israel, Hamas conflict, the Middle East, how our policy may evolve, and how will what it will look like actually? Are we seeing? We'll be talking about the cohabitation maybe? What are your ideas?
Okay, so just one rapid thought, because I have a student who is waiting for me for a jury. I'm his professor. I will I have not more than 10 minutes. Is that okay for you?
No, yes, sure, no problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
To respond to your question, I could respond very simply. The French Constitution is very clear. The French foreign policy and the defense policy is the domaine réservé of the President of the Republic. So I could stop there, saying there will be no change in the directive because the president will still be president. He will be, and a weakened president will still be president. Now, there are in the Constitution caveats, or let's say checks and balances. Article 20 and Article 21, which said that the government executes the foreign policy and has the responsibility to take in consideration the integrity, territorial defense. Therefore, the prime minister does have a say, as he is designating the minister of defense. So my first rapid response to that would be saying it depends on the political situation that we have the 7th of July. It's not clear who will win. Will the Rassemblement National win very, let's say, very massively and having the
decisive majority?
Absolute majority, 289 MPs, well, 290 MPs, or will he have to do association with other political parties, the other Republicans who have not decided to run under his auspices, or even some people coming from Renaissance, Modem, or even the Socialist Party? That's not very clear. He may not be winning the election. Therefore, we may have a ungovernability situation in which there will be 3 major blocs, one blocking the other, extreme right against extreme left, and the centrist bloc not being a capability to make a majority. The third scenario is the majority bloc having the capacity to have a majority because none of the two, even though the Rassemblement National is way higher, 35% against the Renaissance Party, 20%, but Renaissance can make some compromise and have a majority. So it depends of the size of the victory of Rassemblement National or the capacity to put a term, or let's say a pressure, lower down its political legitimacy. Now, my second assumption is saying that there's been huge changes inside each political parties as they are closing up to the government. Jordan Bardella has been, during the last 2 weeks, saying exactly the contrary as his political party has been saying during the last 20 years. So he's shifting for a more pragmatical point of view, reminding that when he was member of the European Parliament, he voted for the sustain to Ukraine on the contrary of what his political party was saying in France, saying that he will not put an end to the participation of France in NATO, but he will push for Europeanization of NATO, having more sovereign capabilities abiding from 2 to 3%. And this is very, let's say, very eager to fulfill its commitment of a very sovereign France. Make France again can very well be understood as Hungary is having the same perspective with Make Europe Again, which is, by the way, in next week, the new motto of the 6-month presidency of Hungary, and of course, our friends from the United States, Make America Great Again. So we may have some surprises on the fact that the National Front, which has been presented as pro-Russian, may very well be on a position of not being that so friendly with Russia, because it is very sovereign focused and it will defend the sovereignty of another state, which is Ukraine. That is a possibility. I'm not saying it is truth, but there is some mindsets inside the National Front on that perspective. Continue to fuel the weapons, continue to help Ukraine win its war. But since the United States is giving us the same perspective, put some conditionalities to be more robust on corruption, to put a perspective on an eventual peace negotiation or at least talks with someone. May not be Putin, but on the other side. That's my second assumption. My third assumption is saying that we are in a situation where, I have to say, foreign policy is no longer a priority of any electoral polls or any of the preoccupation of the French. There has been a recent study 2 days ago where foreign policy has been pushed back to be the sixth or the seventh of the major preoccupations of the French. Health, pouvoir d'achat, purchase capacity, not to be declassed, and of course, the question of its overall security, but domestic security, and not about defending the other. So we must be very cautious that the foreign agenda is not a priority when it comes to the differences amongst the political party. And my last point is saying that I think we should be very well sure that in France, never mind who is president, in any country, there is the deep state. There will be a continuity in the way the Minister of Defense will be still training the pilots on Mirage 2000, because we decided to do so. We'll not come back. We know we are a very normative power. When we say something, when we engage something, we push it to the end. We may stop it, but we'll not be coming back backwards. So these are only very rapid points. I'm so sorry. I really have to leave.
Thank you. Yes.
I have my students in 1 minute. So I was very happy to discuss with you, and we have a pleasure
thank
to
you,
continue
Emmanuel.
discussing.
Exactly. Since we are running out of time, just a short word for us. How can France, what can France do about bringing the level of the current level of conflicts down? What can we do in a few words?
Well, I think we should leverage a bit higher the capacity of France to be convincing. Let me say this in very simple words. France is never so strong if it's considered to be a strong state, if it's considered to be a weakened state, if we have a weakened president who has dissolved and therefore missed the unique opportunity to be the leader or the so-called champion of strategic autonomy, then our world or our wording will be less efficient. So in order to make peace, we have to bring in confidence of what France or other countries can do, France or Europe can do. And if we do that, then maybe we can go on the, let's say, the road that General de Gaulle has always said. France is in the middle. We are a middle power. We are a mediating middle power. And if we are in the middle, then we can talk to everyone. We have this rare capacity on behalf of our history, on behalf of our military capacity, on behalf of our deterrence capability that we have offered to be enlarged the European Union, to say, on behalf of that, we can stand. We can stand in front of China, which we were the first to recognize in 1964. We can speak to Vladimir Putin because we are stronger than other European countries. We can be more legitimate because we are stronger in NATO. But we have to have the three agenda at the same time. With a strong president, that's for sure. With a weakened president, that's very much more difficult.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye to my colleagues.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
And the same question actually to Konstantin. I will not ask you about what Russia can do for obvious reasons, but what can the West do to bring the level of those conflicts down, to decrease the conflictuality in the world? Briefly, really briefly.
The conflicts are different, so you have to apply different tools to these conflicts. I do think that the West should probably have a more integrated and more united view of Iran to deal with the region, with the Middle East. Because otherwise the mullahs feel that they can, play the US against, the Germans or the French or whoever. And I think that this assessment of Iran should be, I would say, more political, geopolitical, security-minded, because, generally there is, in some way, now we've seen that, with the Russo-Ukraine war, sometimes too much business interests really muddy the waters. And when push comes to shove, we can't orient ourselves, and as was with the Germans in Russia, for example. With regard to Ukraine, I think I made myself very clear. I do think that this is a conflict in which Western resolution will be very, very important, and because also you're still dealing with, well, give or take, people that can take rational decisions where they feel that they're on fire. Their backside is on fire. So I think that is a very important thing. And finally, what I think needs to be recognized is that maybe over time, we need to look at developing new ways of control of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear nukes and stuff like that, because it's very clear that today access to it is pretty easy. Ukraine can produce nuclear weapons if it wants to. So we need to look maybe after the Russo-Ukrainian war, after Russia becomes probably weaker and more amenable to talking sense, about developing or maybe creating new regimes of non-proliferation, nuclear arms control, and things like that, because I'm afraid that we're living in a completely different economic and information environment in which maybe new decisions should be taken regarding that. That's been on my mind for a bit of time recently. It's like very theoretic concept, but I think that it needs to be addressed, but we have other priorities now.
Thank you, Konstantin. And so, Brigham, what the US can do? The same question, but about your national agenda and national position.
Well, and I'll continue where Konstantin led off. I think, we have to use all of the tools at our disposal. I mean, there's a reason why if you're a carpenter, you don't just have a hammer or a saw. You need different tools for different things. And we have to be able to deploy these tools, whether it is through nation building, whether it is through humanitarian outreach, whether it is through sanctions, whether it is through financial disincentives, whether it's through equipping others, or frankly, clandestine operations, or whatever needs to be done, the full suite needs to be available. And the first thing that we can do is stop saying stuff is off the table. I don't know why anybody bets against themselves by saying, well, we're not going to do this, or we're not going to do that when it comes to dealing with our adversaries. Now, similarly, speaking of Russia, I had high hopes. In fact, I participated in a joint exercise with the Commonwealth of Independent States, as it was known, for a short period of time. And like a lot of us, I don't think any of us wants to see Russia fail as a state. That would be very destabilizing. We also don't want them to see them as a junior player second to China and captive to China moving forward either. So, we have to figure out ways to incentivize a change in behavior. Maybe this is not possible so long as one man stays in power, but I think we're also concerned what comes next, because the presumption that, Russia will be back to normal after Vladimirovich is gone is not true either, right? That's not how this works over there. And at the similar token, we need to figure out how to corral China's worst tendencies of aggressiveness, that teenager that bullies their way around, because not only is trade important with China, but the South China Sea is extremely important to us and to our allies, to navigation, shipping, commerce. But, the truth is, to some extent, America's unilateral stake as the global superpower is not as hegemonic as people might like to think. And in some respects, the world is more fragmented now than during the Cold War, where we kept our people in line, they kept their people in line. Yeah, things happened. We talked about proxies, but nobody was actually going to let things get too totally out of control. And I think, those rules, that even unspoken or unwritten rules, have become frayed and fragmented. And so we have to look for ways where we can find some cooperation. That sounds different from where I came from, but I think it's all consistent. You can still say no, but you can also still say, let's sit down and talk about things and figure out where we can do things. But, Denys, I think the biggest trouble right now, at least in America, is we also have short attention spans, right? We're all on the latest social media and, okay, now we're bored with that. We move on to the next shiny penny. And this requires us to be resolute. It requires stability. It requires perseverance to see things through, because to that end, I think, and gladly, I've seen your government, Macron, change course on Ukraine. We've seen some leadership emerge that I think is very, very beneficial for the West. And we've seen the West awaken, perhaps late, but I do think we're awakened. It still concerns me, though, that some of our policies are not guided by realism. We'll save climate change for another day, but there are some real risks that we could get into there if we're not very careful vis-a-vis economic and national security. So I think we have to be clear-eyed and really look at things from a realistic perspective and try to take emotion out of a lot of these decisions.
Thank you. So perseverance, as we say. Let it be the word of this great discussion. And I thank you all for your time and for your thoughts and insights and ideas about those topics we have discussed. And we could have spent the whole day on it, actually. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes.
Merci,
thank you.
Thanks a million. Brim, thank you.
Yes, thank you as well. Look forward to more fruitful discussions in the future.
I hope so too.